Okay, so in the context of the Heather and Tucci giraffe case and conviction, there's been discussion on the comments on my channel, and it's also been raised by some of the followers of Heather and Tucci giraffe, in particular Light Worker 34, about where the idea of the TDA accounts came from. And I want to lay out the chronology or the timeline of where this stuff came from, because it's probably the best way of explaining why it's nonsense. And it's best to start with the beginning, I'm guessing. The TDA thing goes all the way back to Roger Elvig. Roger Elvig was a member of the Aryan Nations, which is a a white nationalist, white supremacist group. And he's the guy who began the redemption movement. What the redemption movement consists of, as explained on this SPLC article, which is very good. The redemption movement claims that for every birth certificate issued in the United States since the 1936 Social Security Act, the federal government deposits $630,000 in a secret bank account linked to the newborn American. Redemptionists claim that by executing a series of arcane legal maneuvers, a person may entitle themselves to the money held in the name of the entity, and may then access these funds with sight drafts, better known to business owners and prosecutors as bogus checks. Elvig also encouraged redemption, blah, blah, blah. Now, this is the first element of the TDA scam that comes from Roger Elvig. Keep in mind, number one, the secret bank account that is tied to your social security number that you can access by using checks drawn on Treasury accounts. Now, if we go to US v. Rosno, which everything will be linked in the description, we can see that the sight drafts invented and promoted by Roger Elvig were payable out of the United States Treasury. So already here, from the 90s and 80s, we already have all the elements of Harvey Dent's TDA scam. We have the secret account, Social Security, and payable out of the United States Treasury. So all the fundamental elements of Harvey's TDA theory were already developed in the 80s and 90s. Now, if we look at one of the sight drafts, which were basically fake checks developed by Roger Elvig, we see all the elements of the TDA scam and what Heather was promoting and Harvey Dent was promoting. Number one, we have up on the left, top left, we have UCC registration numbers. So here we see the link to Heather's UCC filings and the secret TDA accounts. All repeating the same concepts. Down here, we see the account number is actually, they're using their social security number without dashes as an account number. And over here we see, in the middle, we see tender at par, and then in parentheses, HJR 192, which is a reference to a House Joint Resolution that's popular among sovereign citizens. And of course, this was sent to the United States Treasury, expecting the United States Treasury to pay money out of the secret account. So in all, essentially, this is the same as the current version of the TDA, except it was done with checks instead of wire transfers via ACH. The only thing that's changed between then, 20 years ago, and right now in 2018, is that now they're using wire transfers, whereas back then they used checks. Now, how does this transfer to Harvey Dent and Heather Antucci Giraffe? One of Roger Aldick's students, according to Winston Shrout, was Winston Shrout. Winston Shrout learned from Roger Aldick and promoted and borrowed many of his ideas. And in Heather's own words, she got her information from Winston Shrout.
Lien, which I love Winston Shrout because nobody made it clear to me about what a lien was in the application of a lien and what it could not apply to than Winston Shrout. And I was so grateful for the work he did.
Now, in the early 2000s, Winston Shrout figured out that he could make a lot of money telling people that the government had secret accounts that you could draw and pay draw money from and pay debts with. For example, in this case from 2016, we find out that Shrout charges $500 for his seminars. His DVDs on his website are often $200, $100. So again, Winston Shrout made it a business to promote these theories about Treasury accounts, secret Treasury accounts on the internet as a business. And in the next few clips, notice that he refers to Treasury Direct, and he refers to not only the secret accounts, but also that the idea that people are the value, which is something that Heather Antucci Giraffe repeats a lot in all her videos and interviews, and it's also something that Randy Bean repeated himself in court. That idea of people being value, it comes directly from Winston Shrout.
But what we have been using, which has worked, is basically the number that's on your Social Security card without dashes in it. If you put dashes in it, it may in fact get rerouted to the wrong place, because what we're doing here by supplying this exemption ID number is that we're going what's called Treasury Direct.
And we're going to start talking about who has the value that's in this trust. Okay, so on this trust, on this prepaid account, there was a certain sum that was determined, and that sum was determined by accessing the life insurance actuarial tables. The government actually went to the insurance companies and said, how much, what's the value of a person's life's work? And they set a number on it at some figure. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it's $1 million. Okay.
Now, in the indictment for Winston Shrout's criminal case, in which he was found guilty of all the charges and is being sentenced at the end of the month, we get the details of what he was doing. He was writing fictitious financial instruments payable with the Department of Treasury, drawing on a fabricated account number, which was the same as his Social Security number. Exactly the same thing that Randy Bean was doing. The only difference was, instead of fictitious financial instruments, basically checks, Randy Bean did the same thing except with a wire transfer. Keep in mind, you can basically do a check and a wire transfer are basically the same thing. A check has a routing number, an account number, and the amount. A wire transfer has the same thing. It has the routing number, the account number, and the amount of money that you want to send. It's just the paper version and the electronic version of the same thing. Now, one of the things that you may have heard online, either stated by Heather or Randy or people at IUV or Lightworker, is the idea that Randy Bean is the first person to go to jail for trying to access the TDA accounts. Now, that simply is not true. As we see in U.S. v. Pansier, which is a case from 2009, quote, Pansier was a tax protester, didn't pay his taxes, blah blah, got busted on tax issues. He tried to pay off his tax debts with phony cites draft. The checks he used to try to pay off his taxes were drawn on a Treasury direct account issued under the authority of the United States Treasury. Blah blah. So as early as 2009, we had people trying to pay debts with Treasury direct accounts which did not exist and going to jail. Moving on, as explained again in the decision, quote, the cite drafts included a purported Treasury direct routing number. Again, the same thing that Harvey Dent was doing. He was using the U.S. Treasury Federal Reserve routing numbers. It listed his Social Security number as the Treasury direct account number, which is the same thing that Randy and Harvey Dent were doing. Now, here is another important point. When the IRS received these phony cite drafts, it initially credited Panzier's account and attempted to present them for payment at several banks where they were dishonored. Now, this is part of a lot of the confusion that you see over at IUV and other places where these people try to pay off debts with TDA accounts that don't exist, and they claim that the accounts are being, the payments are being reversed. No, as with basically all payments, when you initially submit it, you get a credit to your account while the payment is being processed. Once the payment fails, because again, it refers to an account that does not exist, the credit is removed. That does not mean that the transaction was reversed. It means that the transaction never took place. It failed because it refers to an account number that does not exist. Now, if you enjoy irony, this is where it really gets good. At Panzier's trial, a banker testified that the TDA accounts, etc., do not exist. The exact same thing that happened in Randy and Heather's trial. Now, just like Randy did, Panzier argued that the banker was not qualified to testify about Treasury direct accounts or the Uniform Commercial Code. Again, Panzier in 2009 was using the UCC to claim that the accounts exist unsuccessfully and ended up in jail. More recently, we have United States v. Gibson, in which another guy was found guilty after trying to pay off his taxes with a Treasury direct account, which does not exist, but it contains a discussion of the TDA scam. Rather, it is sufficient to draw from some sort of account maintained by the United States government for it to count as fictitious. It cites a case from, importantly, 2003, concluding that the TDA accounts are not existent. Well, actually, they say it more clearly down here. Let me find it for you. For example, in Getzschman, I'm not going to pretend I know how to pronounce that. The defendants claimed to own millions of dollars in Treasury direct accounts that do not actually exist. The defendants then proceeded to create money orders and cite drafts drawn on their Treasury direct accounts to pay for goods and services. The exact same thing that Randy did. Blah blah. They were found guilty, and just like Gibson and Getzschman, they were found guilty and sent to jail. Now, the Getzschman decision is actually very interesting because it's almost identical to Randy's case. Quote, and let's keep in mind here, this is from 2003. This was, 15 years ago. Quote, Fred and Rick Getzschman were involved in the common law movement, who believe that they are not subject to state or federal laws, just like Randy and Heather. One theory of the common law movement is so-called redemption theory, which teaches that individuals can use the Uniform Commercial Code, same crap that Heather was citing, to create fictitious Treasury direct accounts in the United States Treasury Department. Fred and Rick Getzschman attempted to use the theory to obtain goods and property. Fred Getzschman ordered goods from Land's End, and money orders drawn on the Department of Treasury to pay for the goods. Fred Getzschman attempted to purchase a computer from Gateway Computers. Using a money order, he took possession of the computer, which was seized during the execution of a search warrant. Fred Getzschman also attempted to use a money order drawn on the Department of Treasury, and this is the punchline here, to purchase 2 Ford vehicles. The same thing Randy did. Randy tried to buy I think it was a Ford F-150 for 80 grand. So the same thing that Randy did 15 years later, these guys went to jail for. Rick also attempted to purchase a Toyota Land Cruiser. What else? Blah, blah, blah. We see here that Rick visited the Montana Freeman in 1995, which again is where this scam comes from. Now, this is an important paragraph for Randy in regards to his sentencing, because the amount of time in jail that you will spend in jail depends on the intended loss attributable. And in the district court, they concluded that the dollar amount on the site drafts is what counts as the intended loss. Moving on, the government presented evidence that Rick claimed to have $100 million in his fictitious Treasury direct account. So, to repeat that, the court is explicitly stating that these accounts do not exist, and the district court reasonably could have inferred Fred Getzschman knew this. It was therefore reasonable to foresee that he would attempt to use the entire amount of funds he claimed to have available. So, the actual amount of loss doesn't matter. What they're going to calculate how long they're going to put you in jail for is based on how many of these fake instruments you filed. So in Randy's case, they could calculate it with up to $30 million because he attempted to pass $30 million in bad wire transfers. So keep in mind how serious this crap is. They can, even if the actual loss that the bank, the actual amount of money that the bank loses is maybe a couple $1,000s, they can calculate, they can throw you in jail based on the amount of money that you attempted to collect, and this very easily gets into ridiculous amounts of time spent in jail. The Montana Freeman, for example, died in jail for, again, bad checks. Now, just to sort of put an end to this, finish the video with 2005 earliest warning from the government about TDA accounts that I've been able to find. It's from the Internal Revenue Service IRS bulletin from 2005. Under discussion of the quote strawman claim. The strawman claim is premised on the erroneous theory that most government documents do not actually refer to individuals. No tax is owed by the real individual because it can be satisfied by money in a Treasury direct account held in the name of the strawman. So as early as 2005, the IRS was warning people about TDA scams. So, no, Harvey Dent did not invent the TDA scam. It's a lot older than TDA, than Harvey Dent. It's a lot older than Heather and Giraffe. This is almost a 30-year-old scam. The accounts do not exist. It can't be stated clearly enough. This is something that was invented by a white racist in the 80s, and people have been going to jail trying to access these accounts for 3 decades. That's how ridiculous this is.